Well, good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the third Rother Tree Hour webinar. My name is Nick Redman from Bexhill Environmental Group, and I'm your chairperson for today's event. This webinar is part of an initiative to build a community of tree champions caring for the Rother treescape under the auspices of the Rother District Environment Strategy. The partners in this venture are Bexhill Environmental Group, Dallington Forest Project, Friends of Coombe Valley, the Woodland Trust, High Weald Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, and of course Rother District Council. Today's talk will highlight the importance of ancient and veteran trees. We're delighted to welcome our two speakers, who are Tom Reed, Citizen Science Officer with the Woodland Trust, and Doug Edworthy, Tree Champion stroke Warden for Brightling and Dallington Parish Councils. The talks should last about 45 minutes, with Tom presenting first, followed by Doug. We'll then have a panel session to cover your questions for the remaining 15 minutes or so. Please could I ask that you remain on mute throughout the session, including the Q&A part. If you have a question that you'd like to put to our speakers and the panel, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, not the chat button, and we'll endeavour to get through as many as we can. But fear not, if your question isn't put through today, we'll pass it on to our speakers for a written response, and that'll be made available when the webinar is published on the Rother website in due course. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Tom Reed from the Woodland Trust to introduce himself and to tell you about what defines an ancient or veteran tree and how you can help to record them. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that introduction. Hoping you can all see my screen. And it's a pleasure to have you all on the call today. Thanks for making time to come listen to this presentation. As Nick says, I'm going to start talking about the Ancient Tree Inventory. I am the Citizen Science Officer at the Woodland Trust for the project, and I've been involved in the project since 2019. And yeah, I'm just going to basically share with you some insights into the project, an overview of how it works, some definitions of ancient and veteran trees, and then an explanation as to how you can get involved with recording trees to the inventory as well. Firstly, just to give a bit of background to the project, it's been going for over 16 years now. It started as a project called the Ancient Tree Hunt, which was a partnership project between the Woodland Trust, the Tree Register, and the Ancient Tree Forum. Today, it is referred to as the Ancient Tree Inventory rather than the Ancient Tree Hunt, and that partnership is very much still there. To describe it in a sentence, I like to think of it as a living database of ancient, veteran, and notable trees. And like I say, we're going to describe more about those, or explain those terms in more detail very shortly. What we have on the website, if you've not already viewed it already, is we have an interactive map that has special trees that you can, like I say, ancient, veteran, notable. You can sort of browse each tree, you can click on each one, and you can find out more information about it. You can see photographs of each tree, and you can see exactly where they are if you wanted to go visit them. We currently have about 170,000 verified trees on the Ancient Tree Inventory. And that sort of database is curated by a team of volunteer verifiers. I'm actually going to touch on that towards the end of my presentation, but we basically have volunteers who go and visit the trees to verify them to the database. And however, you don't need to be a volunteer in order to help us. Anyone can add tree record to the map. It's what we call a citizen science project. So any member of the public can create an account on the Ancient Tree Inventory, which allows them to begin recording. So what happens initially is that once someone has registered and they record their tree, it appears on our map as an unverified tree. It's one of these sort of grey icons with a U symbol that you can see in the center of the screen where the arrow is pointing. What happens after that is one of the verifiers that I've mentioned will visit the tree, and they will check whether that data is accurate, or whether, they'll verify whether it's ancient, veteran, or notable. Because the idea is that every tree on the inventory should fit into one of those three categories, and it's the verifier's decision as to whether they meet those criteria. So they'll do extra things such as check the species ID and check that the girth of the tree has been measured correctly and that it's in the right place. And then they'll update the record online. And after that, once the tree is verified, it then appears as one of these coloured icons with an A, a V, or an N to dictate whether it's ancient, veteran, or notable. So that's a bit of an overview of how the project works. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit now about what we record and go into more detail about ancient, veteran, notable. But before I do that, I thought it really makes sense to just give an overview as to why we do this. So, as I'm sure you'd all agree, ancient and veteran trees are irreplaceable. There are trees that you'll see in both the talks today, which have grown over immense timescales, have unique biological and cultural value even. And so from that point of view, they are of high conservation value. Now, the ancient tree inventory data is currently referred to by Natural England as the sort of consultation tool to use for ancient and veteran tree locations. And that is part of something called the National Planning Policy Framework. It actually features in their standing advice. The National Planning Policy Framework is something that advises developers, planners to adhere to a strict sort of series of guides. So they're not legally binding, but they're strongly advised. And like I say, the planning framework basically says that any loss or any development which would result in the loss or deterioration of ancient and veteran trees should be avoided unless a compensation strategy exists. Now, that's kind of, that's come out in the past sort of 2 years, the National Planning Policy Framework amendment to reference ancient and veteran trees in that way, which is a fantastic step in the right direction for their conservation. And so basically the data that we collect to the project now has the potential to be considered and inform those planning decisions, so that any kind of harm to ancient and veteran trees can be avoided at the planning stage, rather than waiting for a tree to become threatened and then have to react. So that just gives an example of a sort of a real world application to what the database has now. So hopefully that already gives you more of a sort of an inspiration to get involved, to know that it does have that real world potential. So what do we record? Well, I've already mentioned the phrases ancient, veteran, notable. I think it's fair to say that the primary aim of the ATI is to focus on ancient and veteran trees. So I thought I should just make those definitions distinct. On the bottom of the screen, I've got a diagram which shows the kind of life stage, or different life stages of a tree, starting from the young, going through to the mature phase, and finally to the ancient phase, which is what you can see from the diagram is by far the longest stage. It's the third and final stage of a tree's life, and it can last for hundreds of years in itself. So we describe an ancient tree as being one that has passed this mature phase and is old or aged in comparison with other trees of the same species. I'll explain why that's really crucial in a moment. But to contrast with veteran trees, first of all, the phrase veteran, it's not actually a life stage in the way that ancient is a stage of a tree's life. It's the third and final stage. The term veteran describes a tree that displays similar characteristics of an ancient tree, but it actually lacks the great age to be considered ancient for its species. So they're not actually old enough to be considered ancient for their species, but they still show some of the kind of features that you might expect to see on an ancient tree. Like I say, it's those condition features that make make veteran trees distinct. Now, the ancient tree inventory has, well, we've got about 14,500 ancient trees recorded and about 110,000 veterans. So we've got far more veterans recorded, and that's simply because that kind of condition definition is very broad. But just to give some sort of examples of some ancient and veteran tree characteristics, and these are things that if you're looking for trees to record, I would strongly advise that you focus on looking for trees that show features like this. First of all, this diagram that we've shared on screen is probably almost too perfect a tree, if you like. It's almost like the tree that you'll never find, because there are just, there's so many ancient and veteran features on this particular example with the diagram. But some trees will just show some of these. They might show 2 or 3. But basically, to sort of train your eye when looking for ancient and veteran trees, I always recommend working from the top of the tree and working down. So first of all, you might spot something called retrenchment. We've actually got a good photo of that on the next slide, so I'll explain more about that later. But retrenchment is something you'll observe in the upper branches of a tree. You might spot things like woodpecker holes and hollowing branches. In fact, woodpecker holes are a good indication that those branches are hollowing. So as a tree gets older, it will naturally start to hollow, including its trunk and its branches. So look for hollows, look for cavities and water pockets in the tree as well. Dead and hollowing branches, hollowing trunk. That's a big one. So if you can see a tree that's visibly hollowing, that's a fantastic indicator that that tree is at least veteran, if not ancient, because it takes a very long time for a tree to become visibly hollow naturally. And that hollowing process will be taking place in veteran trees, sometimes not to be seen. It's actually as a result of special decomposer fungi or heart rot fungi that are able to degrade the inner sort of heartwood of the tree without degrading the sapwood. So you have a situation where the tree remains fairly intact, structurally remains intact, but actually it's starting to hollow on the inside. And sometimes when that hollowing, is allowed to continue for a long time, for decades, eventually you'll get to a point where the tree becomes visibly hollow. And sort of linked with that, you'll start to see other fractures in the trunk. You'll even maybe start to see burrs on the side of the trunk, and the trunk itself will have a very large girth. So we've got a good diagram coming up shortly where I'll illustrate that. But generally, ancient trees have grown much more broad in appearance rather than tall. They really swell to these enormous sizes. You might see buttressing in the roots and fallen deadwood on the ground as well. So that's just an overview of some of the different microhabitats that you might find across an ancient tree, and that's what makes them all the more valuable for nature as well, because here you've got like a living ecosystem, not just a tree, but a series of connected microhabitats that really crucial to supporting saproxylic species. So that's species that depend on deadwood. So on the next slide, I promised an example of retrenchment. So from this photograph, you can see that this tree in the center of the screen has developed some sort of dead wood in the upper canopy. You've got these bare antler-like branches that protrude from the top. And this is a classic sign of a tree starting to what we call grow down. So as trees get older, they start to lose the upper parts of their canopy as the canopy rebalances itself with the root system below. And as these parts of the canopy are now energy demanding, it starts to shed them, and it loses what's called apical dominance. So in this case, we've got a maiden tree that would have had originally one main stem. That main stem will now start to die back, and the tree will invest in what at the moment what are sort of subordinate stems, and those will become more dominant, and the tree will become broader in appearance rather than taller. So that's just an example of retrenchment. It's not always something you can see that easy, particularly in the winter time. It's good to see it around about now and in the summertime when the trees are in leaf, so that it really highlights which parts of the tree are dying back. So that's just a quick example of retrenchment. And like I say, that's something that trees naturally do as they age. So how can you help with the ancient tree inventory? Well, it's fair to say that big trees are still becoming, discovered. And sometimes, even every day we find a tree that's more than 5 meters in girth. Last year we had over 600 trees that were more than six meters in girth found across the UK, which is still remarkable that we're still finding these trees of that size. So you can help us first by recording new trees to the inventory, as we'll describe later. But if you want to actually enhance the existing records, you can do that too, by adding photographs to them and comments that you might have, simply checking whether they're still there or not, and editing any sort of updates that might be required. So I mentioned about recording big trees. Actually, many species don't grow that big at all. And even in the ancient phase, they won't visibly look large. It's very easy to get sort of tunnel vision for those large oaks and large sweet chestnuts, and looking for the large yew trees and chestnuts. So species like field maple and hawthorn and alder and rowan that you can see on screen won't be big. You'd be lucky to find a hawthorn that's more than 2.5 meters. If you found that, then that would be getting on for some of the biggest hawthorn that we have on the ancient tree inventory. More typically, you'd be expecting to find a hawthorn that's about 1.25 meters in girth plus. That's about the sort of girth it starts to become interesting for the ATI. And same with field maple, they don't grow particularly big, and rowan. So we've got a handy diagram which is available in what's known as Ancient Tree Guide number 4. And these are available digitally from either the Ancient Tree Forums website or the Woodland Trust website. You just search Ancient Tree Guide number 4. And we've got a guide here which sort of gives a rule of thumb insight into likely girth size and ancient veteran status. So this was actually created back in 2008, so it does need a revision, but can still be used as a reference. Different species, as I've said, have sort of different growth habits, reach different sizes, they have different life expectancies, and actually some trees become ancient much earlier than others. So in the case of yew, which is at the top of this chart, yew trees aren't considered ancient until they're about 800 years of age. That's because they grow really slowly and live for very long periods. Some of the oldest yew in the country is maybe over 5,000 years old, and we expect them to become ancient at around about 6.5 meters in girth. Of course, that really depends on where they're growing, because you need to take into account of environmental conditions and how that's affected growth rate, and any past management that the tree might have had, whether it's been coppiced or pollarded or simply left to grow as a maiden tree. Now let's contrast that 6.5 meters with let's say alder. You can see at the minute that we haven't really got any maiden alder that's sort of 6.5 meters in size. In fact, you'd be lucky to find an alder that's sort of more than 4.5 to 5.5 meter plus. There'll be some of the champion alder in the country. So, alder its sort of theoretical maximum likely size is much smaller. Whereas for yew trees, that sort of 5 meter would only just becoming worth noting, really. It might be notable, might potentially be veteran, depending on the condition of that tree. But hopefully that helps to give an overview as to how different species have these sort of different expected sizes. And it's a case of just learning what's normal in your local area, I guess. And we've actually got some guides that we've put on the Ancient Tree Inventory website, some species guides for 11 commonly recorded species, where it will indicate, record all oak more than 4 meters, for example, and an indication of when each species becomes ancient. So do have a look at those. But like I say, that guidance has been created on a national scale, so it's like an average. It would be worth considering, your local knowledge of trees, and to get a feel for what oak and yew and ash and beech look like in your area, and what to expect. So Doug will be sharing some local examples later, so hopefully that will help to reinforce that. But that's all I really wanted to say on the kind of ancient tree theory. This next bit, I'm just going to look at the Ancient Tree Inventory website itself and how you can record. So as I mentioned at the start, everyone needs to register before they can add a tree. It's free to register an account. You just go on our website, click on register at the top right, where this is highlighted by this red circle, and make sure you sign in, because it won't let you do it, or it won't let you add a tree until you signed in. When you're ready to add a tree, just simply click the Add a Tree button on our website, and it will guide you through like a recording journey where you'll be asked to enter all the information. If you wanted to find out whether your tree is already recorded before you add it, click on Tree Search, and you'll be taken to the interactive map where you can view trees in your local area. So that's how you register. In terms of what you need to record, we've got a list of information which is essential to record, and we have a list of information which is additional. But generally, what I'd say to people at this stage is try to record as much information as you can, because it really helps us to create a much more meaningful data set. So rather than just focusing on the essential information, if you can record some of the other things as well, that'd be much appreciated. The essential information you need to record, though, is the tree's location, which is best taken as a 10-figure grid reference. You can then record either the genus or species of tree. If you can't quite get it down to species level, then that's okay. You can just record. Well, let's say if you can't decide if the tree is peduncular oak or sessile oak, then you can just record it as oak. But generally, it's best to try and get it down to species level if you can. You'll need to record the girth of the tree, and I've actually got a few slides to look at that in a moment, so I'll just skip through that. And the final thing that's essential is access, so whether it's public or private access. That will really help the verifiers know when it comes to planning to visit a tree, whether they need to try and arrange access with the landowner or whether they can just go and visit. So whilst it isn't essential to record a photograph, in other words, the website will allow you to do so without adding a photo, I would strongly encourage you to add photos if you can, because this just takes a record from being, simply something in the database to something that's much more meaningful and interactive. So it means that for a start, the verifiers are more likely to be able to find the tree, but it helps us to really showcase the value of that tree in terms of the habitats that it has, it's just really handy for someone else looking at that record to get a sense of what that tree looks like and how it's developed and what form it is. I mean, you can actually record the form of the tree as a separate item. So whether it's a maiden, a pollard, a coppice, a multi-stem, you can record the tree's condition, such as any of those sort of decay features we talked about, whether it's got hollowing, dead wood in the crown, cavities, water pockets. You can record the presence of epiphytes like moss, ivy, what we call cuckoo trees as well. So these are trees that develop in the canopy of other trees. You can record other wildlife features such as the presence of heart rot fungi, even the presence of wood-boring invertebrates and evidence of bats, if that's known. So again, if you can record as much information as possible, that's really helpful. So just a mention on recording girth of the tree. So every tree we record the girth of, normally that's a height of 1.5 meters from the ground. That's assuming that that's possible. Basically, you're really looking for the narrowest girth measurement, either at or below 1.5 meters. So in the example on the left, you've almost got a perfect tree there, perfect maiden, nice, clean, single stem where you can walk the whole way around the tree with your tape measure. It would be nice if every tree was like that, but sadly, not every one is as easy to measure. And it will take some perseverance sometimes in order to, negotiate the form of the tree. But generally, you're looking for like the waistline of the tree, if that helps to use that analogy. So on the tree on the right-hand side, you can see we've had to record further down on the trunk because if we'd recorded at that 1.5 meter height, we would have included a low branch, which would have exaggerated the girth measurement. The reason for recording girth, by the way, is simply because it helps us to have a sort of a metric to compare trees of similar ages. So as a tree grows, every year it adds on one annual growth ring. And so by capturing girth information now, if we remeasure trees in the future, we might be able to sort of suggest likely growth rates, and that will help us to estimate the age of trees perhaps one day. But at the moment, it simply serves as a rule of thumb metric so that we have a number that we can compare size for between trees, and that can help us when comparing trees in different environmental conditions and landscapes. So as I said before, not every tree is going to be easy to record. If a tree has lots of burrs, for example, as ancient trees often develop when they get older, they also might develop fractures and splits. You just have to try and find the narrowest girth measurement that you can. So in this case, the recorder would have gone between the two groups of burrs and gone for the narrowest girth measurement they could. You should always record the height that you took the girth measurement as well, if you didn't take it at 1.5 meters. So in the case of this coppice on the right-hand side, we tend to record the coppice stool itself rather than around the branches or stems, sorry. And that means we get a much more accurate girth measurement. And that's sometimes only, even 15 centimeters to 30 centimeters from the ground. You just need to make sure you capture that. So that's a note on girth. It kind of interplays with tree form. Basically, it's important if you can try and record things like whether the tree is a pollard or whether the tree is a coppice or a multi-stem tree, because that can have an effect on, when we're trying to make those age comparisons or size comparisons. If you took pollard, for example, if you compared a 400-year-old oak, let's say you've got two trees, they're both 400-year-old oaks, one's a maiden, one's a pollard. Well, chances are the pollard is going to be smaller because a pollard is where the main sort of branches have been cut around about sort of 2 to 3 meter height on the trunk. And that results in several branches forming rather than having one dominant stem. And the overall effect is that it actually keeps the tree a bit smaller. So the tree invests its energy into regrowing these stems. And of course, if it's without branches and leaves for a part of its life, that's going to affect its growth rate as well. So generally pollards are going to be smaller, and the same with coppices. So you can record tree form, and always just look up and down the tree when you're looking at the form of the tree. That's a good time to look at the tree's condition too. So look for that hollowing, start from the top of the tree, work your way down, and make sure you record as many of these sort of decay features as possible. I've already mentioned that you record things like epiphytes if they're, only record them if they're visible and prominent. And it's the same with fungi as well. If you can see large sort of decomposer fungi throughout the trunk and branches, then you can record those. We've actually got some preset options for different species too that you can select if you happen to know the species. Once you've recorded all of your information, you can then click Submit Record, and that will complete it. That will make it an unverified tree that our verifiers will then be able to come along and verify. Now, on that subject, I was just going to very briefly mention about becoming a verifier. So this year, we're actually in the process of developing a brand new training course for verifiers. So we're not actively recruiting for new volunteers this year. However, from 2022, we'll have a new training course that we want to roll out, and we will be looking for interested volunteers or maybe people who want to become verifiers. I think between now and then, I would say the best way to get involved with the Ancient Tree Inventory is to simply start recording. It's the best way to learn, and you'll get used to the process of adding a tree to the website. You'll get used to the sort of spotting ancient and veteran trees and looking for those decay characteristics, and you'll get more familiar with trees in your local area. So if you're interested in becoming a verifier, by all means, you can send me an email, and I'm basically putting together a bit of a waiting list. So those people who would like to potentially become verifiers one day, we can make contact with you once we're able to do so. So I just thought I'd mention that whilst we're here. But that is the end of my talk, and I'd now like to hand over to Doug, who is going to take us through some more local examples of ancient and veteran trees that are in the Darlington Forest. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand over to Doug.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Tom. I hope everybody can see my screen okay. I'm Doug Edworthy, and I'm the tree warden for the two parishes of Brightling and Dallington on the High Weald of East Sussex. Thanks, Tom, for explaining about ancient and veteran trees. I'm going to talk to you about the ancient and veteran trees that we've got here in Dallington Forest, and also why they're here. The forest lies on the High Weald between Brightling, Dallington, Burwash and Broadoak Heathfield. And to tell the story of Dallington Forest's ancient and veteran trees, how far back in time do we need to go? The image on the right shows sandstone ripple beds that were laid down over 130 million years ago. That's in the early Cretaceous period, when T. rex was roaming the earth. But I don't think we need to go back quite that far. Instead, let's start with the last glacial period, when the temperate coniferous forest retreated from the High Weald and gave way to mainly deciduous woodland. And while a land bridge to the Eurasian continent still existed, wandering bands of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers were finding themselves in an area rich in animals and woodland resources. The High Weald has got evidence of their use of open woodland glades for their prehistoric farming. And as the population increased and agriculture became more important, those glades gradually expanded by cutting back the surrounding forests, and new glades were opened up. From the Stone Age onwards, people and their animals have been coming into the High Weald from the North and South Downs in late summer. And they brought their pigs and other animals to the High Weald to feed on acorns. This is an activity known as pannage. And they brought them along droves that were worn deeper and deeper by generation after generation of hooves and feet. In places, the droveways are lined with old trees overgrown from long abandoned hedges. And this map shows Dallington Forest in relation to Battle, Bexhill and Hastings, and it shows the network of tracks and lanes, or droves, that survive now as our roads and rights of way. The wood pastures where the pigs and other animals foraged became known as dens, and the name den is still found in a lot of the place names around here. Pannage from prehistoric period through to the Middle Ages helped ensure the survival of woodland in the Weald, while other areas were cleared of trees. Because the woodland provided the pannage, there was less incentive to cut it down for other purposes. And it's around this time that Dallington Forest becomes an entity itself. There's evidence that the sister of the Saxon king Harold Godwinson, that's the Harold of the arrow in the eye fame, owned land in Dallington, and it may have remained a hunting forest after the Norman conquest. The High Weald area was the main iron-producing region of Britain for over 2,000 years, and there are archaeological remains of the Roman period onwards to be found all over Dallington Forest. The raw materials were iron ore, water, and wood, and they all came from this area in the High Weald. But it's the demand for wood for iron working, for animal fodder, and for human tools and habitation that's responsible for the forest use and management from the medieval period until the end of the 19th century, when commercial forestry became a bigger driver for woodland management. Now let's look at the three types of tree management that have influenced the trees and woodlands that we see here in the forest today. First, coppicing, which maintains trees at a juvenile age. A regularly coppiced tree will never die of old age. Some coppice stools can reach immense ages. The age of a stool can be estimated from its diameter, and some are so large, perhaps as much as 5.5 meters across, that they're thought to have been continually coppiced for centuries. Now, coppice growth is excellent for animal fodder, charcoal making, hurdle making, and countless other purposes. But a newly coppiced wood needs protection from deer and other browsing animals to allow it to regenerate. And fencing off an area is not an easy thing to do. Pollarding also tends to make trees live longer by reducing the weight and windage of the top part of the tree, as well as maintaining them in a partially juvenile state. And periodically cutting off the top growth ensures a continual supply of animal fodder, building materials or fuel, whilst keeping that new growth out of the reach of browsing animals. Here are the King and the Queen, two of our very old pollard beeches in winter and in summer. And you can see on both of those a lot of the features that Tom was talking about in his description of what makes a tree ancient or veteran. The pollarding here ceased about 100 years ago, and these trees are now losing limbs due to fungal intrusion and general old age. They're both on the Ancient Tree Register, and they're close to public paths, so they're very easy to visit. A stub cut is midway between coppice and pollard. Its top growth is periodically removed like a coppice or pollard, but its height makes it stand out as different. Such trees were used to mark out boundaries, and this ancient hollow ash is in a wood close to Dallington Forest. It's on a public footpath and easy to walk to, but unfortunately a long way from public roads. Once pollarding ceases, pockets of water collect in the overgrown crown, allowing fungi to flourish and work their way through the trunk of the tree, eventually causing it to fail. This is a before and after view of a beautiful veteran pollard beech that succumbed during the recent storm Desmond. The big pollard beeches in the forest are all coming to the ends of their lives now, and there are very few mature beeches growing to take their place. Some landowners are taking steps to create future veterans, but there will be a gap of many decades before the current trees get to such an advanced age. This is likely to have a devastating effect on the many species of plant and animals that rely on very old trees. There are a few truly ancient trees in Dallington Forest, but we've got many, many veterans. This tree is probably only a couple of 100 years old, but as you can see, it's definitely been in the wars. Almost cutting through the base of a young tree and laying it and its neighbours in the same direction makes a living animal-proof barrier. This can be repeated every 5 to 10 years, making the stool, the base of the hedge plants, like a coppice, virtually immortal. The right-hand image is an overstood, that's overgrown, laid hedge, the base of which is probably many hundreds of years old. And I think this example is probably one of the oldest living things in the forest, even older than those big pollarded beeches. And we have a lot of these veteran and ancient hedge stools in and around Dallington Forest. But will current and future landowners look after them? Do they actually understand what they are? I think we've got a big job in educating people to understand the value of them. The shape of a tree can tell a story about its life and the changing conditions in which it's grown over many, many years. On the left, a tree grown entirely amongst other trees, as in a plantation or an unmanaged woodland, will grow up straight and tall with little side growth. In the middle, for a tree grown in the open, perhaps a wood pasture, its branches will spread wide, like this pollard beech that's now surrounded by 20th century plantation growth. On the right, this tree has branches that tell of an early life growing in the open until the management changed and other trees grew up all around, forcing its branches to grow upwards towards the light. Some areas of the forest have been planted up with single species commercial crops from the mid-20th century onwards. Currently unmanaged, these plantations risk causing damage to veteran and ancient trees and the surrounding ancient woodland. And here's an example of a lovely veteran yew that is sadly being crowded out by western hemlock that was planted in the 1950s or 1960s. And now a culturally important tree from a much more recent historical period. There was a German prisoner of war, POW, working camp at Normanhurst Court in Battle, less than 10 miles away from Dallington Forest, that held prisoners until 1948. The camp supplied labour to the gypsum mines at Mountfield, and at the time, much of Dallington Forest was under the management of the mine. Parties of POWs could have been employed as foresters, and perhaps during a lunch break, one of them climbed the tree to leave his indelible mark for posterity. Sadly, the tree fell in December 2019 in a gale, but it's next to a bridleway and you can still visit it and read the inscription. And we're looking for any historical buffs who would like to research TB from Köln and see if we can find any traces of his family. We're planning to organise one or more forest walks for small groups of tree wardens in the forest. But how long would you like the walks to be? Bear in mind there's no parking in the forest, so each walk would include about a mile getting into and out of the forest. There is a self-guided walk already available and more are in development. But please contact Christina at Rother or contact myself and we would love to organise these walks for you later on in the year. Lastly, a few words about the Dallington Forest project. Forge Wood, a 9-hectare plot within Dallington Forest, has been under conservation management since 2008, and it's being managed as a site where best practice and experimental veteran tree management, together with coppicing work, all with long-term monitoring, could be undertaken for everybody's understanding. The Dallington Forest project aims to survey all 1,740 hectares that are enclosed by the red line to record all the important trees and their habitats. And our website, dallingtonforest.uk, is a repository of information about the forest. So thanks for listening, and please visit our website.
Thank you very much, Tom and Doug, for those fascinating talks. I have to say, having not known anything about ancient trees, veteran trees, I'm really intrigued by them now, and I'm sure we all have a lot more knowledge as a result of that. I'm just going to start off with a couple of questions. The first one actually is one that comes up, Laura, sorry if I'm jumping in. It comes up many times that certainly we get asked. What is the situation with regard to ivy on trees? Because so many people say it kills trees, that it's damaging, it should be cut back. What are your views on that, please?
Tom, do you want to lead on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that question. Yes, so it is a question that does come up from time to time, and basically, it's first worth saying that ivy, brings many benefits to wildlife. It's certainly not detrimental to a tree. It naturally coexists with trees and actually provides a lot of habitat as well as structural value. To give an example of sort of the habitats that ivy helps to create, well, it's an important source of for late pollinators, particularly in September, October time, when a lot of other plants have died by, ivy continues to flower. And for those sort of pollinators in September, October, provides a vital food source. Also for bats as well, when ivy gets really thick on old trees, the spaces between the ivy vine and the trunk actually are known to be a habitat for bats that hibernate over the winter. So from a wildlife point of view, it has immense value, and it's certainly not detrimental to a tree at all. It won't, even though you may get some cases where a tree looks like it has been saturated with ivy. That's actually no harm to the tree, and certainly shouldn't be removed, like I say, particularly for the wildlife benefits that it brings.
Can I just add something as well? If people are concerned about ivy on a tree, the key thing is to get somebody to check the tree. The tree may be perfectly sound, so if you can get a qualified arborist to come and check the tree and assure you that it is sound, then, as Tom said, leave the ivy where it is. There are cases though where a tree is becoming rotten or it's becoming unsafe, and it may be that the ivy is the only thing holding it up, but it's a qualified arborist that can come and tell you whether or not that tree needs any attention. And to carry on from what Tom was saying about the flowers from the ivy, I'm a beekeeper and my bees really do appreciate that ivy flower late in the year.
I think it's true to say, guys, isn't it, that the berries are also very good for birds.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on. Laura, can I hand over to you to do some questions, please?
Yes, of course you can. So thank you everyone for your talks. They were fascinating. I really enjoyed that. We got a question from Clifford Dean quite early into your talk, Doug, asking if all the species were native, not including sweet chestnut and sycamore, but on the map they noticed Robina, and how about holm oak?
Yeah, very good point. Holm oak, I don't think is considered to be native. Robina, I'm not sure about, to be honest. Tom might have more information on that. Most of the trees that we've got in the forest have been at some time planted there. The oaks probably are indigenous, although as Tom will agree, the two different species that we've got, the pedunculate and the sessile oaks, they tend to interbreed an awful lot. So we've got various hybrids of those, and it's difficult to tell which is which. Certainly the sycamore is generally considered to be not native. Sweet chestnut, there's a lot of debate about when it actually came to the country, whether it was the Romans that bought it or whether it was here before. If anybody's interested, there's a brilliant book by, oh dear, what's his name? Rackham, Oliver Rackham, on woodlands, and he's got an awful lot of interesting things to say about the when these things became native. Ribena, I don't know about. Tom, have you got any more information about that?
Not Robinia, no. I just wanted to add in briefly about holm oak and sweet chestnuts though as well, if that's okay. So yeah, holm oak was introduced in the 1500s. So there will be some specimens that very few that may be old enough to be ancient. So I suppose when we're thinking about the introduction of non-natives, what we're really saying is, well, when were they introduced, and based on that, are we likely to have any specimens which are old enough to be ancient? In the case of say sweet chestnut, which was introduced in the Roman times, it's believed, there'll be plenty of examples that are ancient, because sweet chestnut is ancient from about sort of 300 to 400 years of age. Same with oak. Oak is ancient from about 400 years of age, roughly. So there will be some holm oak which are ancient, but they're probably more likely to have trees that are veteran. Because remember, a veteran tree is one that shows those kind of condition features that are associated with age, but is not actually old enough to be officially ancient. We have about 230 species that we record on the ancient tree inventory, but about 88% of them fall under about 10 species. So we've got a lot of non-natives that we can record, but primarily it tends to be natives that get recorded as ancient and veteran, because it's those trees that have persisted long enough to be, to have actually reached the kind of ancient age, if you like. So sorry, I don't have any information about Robinia, but hopefully that helps to answer about sweet chestnut and sycamore and other sort of long-standing non-natives.
Brilliant, thank you. We have had a request, Doug, for your email address, which I think you put up at the end of the talk. If you wouldn't mind popping that in the chat for people to inquire about walks.
Will do.
Wonderful. And Christina did ask whether an ancient tree inventory mobile app is available.
I think I should take that one. So at the moment, we don't have a mobile app for a smartphone. The Ancient Tree Inventory website is web friendly. So if you're out in the field and you've got, 4G or mobile data on, then you should be able to upload it. And you can actually add a record from that straight to the website from your phone. We're actually about to have a new feature that might help you with that, which is that it's the ability to go full screen on the map. So at the moment, you can't go full screen. So if you've got a mobile phone, it's you'll find that the map only takes up like a portion of the screen. So hopefully that process of recording trees via a mobile phone will become much easier in the next couple of weeks.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another question actually, which is a bit later than some, but forgive me for boosting it up because it flows quite well from this, which is, what will you do with the inventory once it's finished, or what is the point? From Angus, who's the head gardener at Mountfield Court.
Yes, good question. So it's often the theory of that we'll one day have a complete inventory is one that comes up a lot and very debatable. But personally, I don't think we will ever have a fully complete ancient tree inventory. The reason for that, well, there's a few reasons. One, actually, we've had a bit of research that's just been completed, a PhD project, which took 4 years to complete. And that's shown that there's an estimated sort of 2 million ancient and veteran trees in England alone. And if you think, well, we've mapped about 120,000 ancient and veteran trees so far out of that theoretical 2 million, you can see we've got a very long way to go. The other thing is, when we say complete in inverted commas, what do we mean by that? Do we mean that we've mapped every single tree, or do we mean complete in different ways? Because could it be the completeness of the data set in terms of how much data has been captured? another thing really to think about is that, you know, trees, or the whole treescape around the country is constantly changing. You know, ancient and veteran trees sadly are always falling over, being lost, changing, being managed. And you know, I like to think of the Ancient Tree Inventory as a project that will be ongoing. As I said, it's a living database. It's a dynamic database that's constantly changing. And that even in 100 years' time, which I hope it's still going in 100 years' time, we'll have even more veteran and ancient trees to add that have become ancient and veteran within that period. So yeah, it's I don't think we'll ever be in a position where we've mapped every single tree, but I think it would certainly be good to start thinking, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could say, I don't know, every national park has a comprehensive inventory, or every SSSI has a comprehensive inventory, or even every major city has a comprehensive inventory. So I think when we think about completeness, that's personally what I would aim for, rather than having like a day where we stop and we put the ATI down.
Okay, Laura, have you got any more questions? We've got a couple of minutes, that's all.
We do, sort of the final 2 minutes. We've actually had 2 questions come through about where you get your funding. So there's one question about that, and obviously the effect of leaving the EU. And also, if you had extra funds, what would you do with it? All the questions sort of tie together, so I'm going to ask them in one sort of lump.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So yeah, where does funding come from for the Ancient Tree Inventory? Well, at the moment, the Ancient Tree Inventory is a core funded project, so it comes out of our core budget, which primarily comes from members, supporters, grants, legacies. So they're the main things that sort of build that core budget at the Woodland Trust. So obviously incredibly grateful to those who were able to support us in doing that. Before the Ancient Tree Inventory, we had the Ancient Tree Hunt, as I mentioned at the start of the talk. That was a heritage lottery funded project. So that was a 5-year project. And basically the Woodland Trust decided to keep the project going as a core funded project up until now. What would we do with more money if a generous donation or extra funding came along, or another heritage lottery funded sort of project came along? Well, yeah, very interesting. I personally would like to see that money used actually to start making a difference to trees on the ground. So not just recording more trees, but actually thinking, well, how can we better use that data so that it sees more trees protected, or that we find more information about threats, or that we, you know, encourage a tree management plan to be available for every single tree, or, you know, can we invest in education? So there are things like the Vet Cert program, where arborists can become sort of specially trained with like a special focus on ancient and veteran tree management. I think those are probably the next steps for making a difference to trees, and you know, that process can only help recording as well. The other thing is, you know, we mentioned apps. I personally feel like if we continue to run the Ancient Tree Inventory as a citizen science project, in the days of the smartphone and you know, the kind of digital age that we find ourselves in, I think an app seems like the next big digital thing for the project. But sadly, there's no plans to make one anytime soon. But no, it's a very good question.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Tom. And I think people would actually be keen to know this about Darlington Forest specifically as well, if you'd be happy to answer, Doug.
Yeah, certainly. The financial support is fairly slim for Darlington Forest. We do get some grants. In fact, if you visit our website, darlingtonforest.uk, that's not .co.uk or .org.uk, just .uk. We've got a page about how the forest is financed. And also how we've got grants available for landowners who want to get involved in Darlington Forest project and get surveys done on their own ancient and veteran trees. So yeah, go to the Darlington Forest website, look up the page that we've got on the website about the Darlington Forest project. Full details about the financial support are on there.
Brilliant. I know Tom's got to dash off, haven't you, Tom, to a back-to-back webinar. So thank you so much for your fantastic talk. Laura, I think we probably cut off now. It is 4 o'clock and or just after 4. So I'm afraid that's all we're going to have time for today. Our thanks go to our two speakers, Tom and Doug, to Laura of Rother District Council for setting up the webinar and doing all the clever IT bits. To Christina, also from Rother, for getting the whole concept of these tree webinars off the ground. But most importantly, to all of you for attending, because if we don't have all this attendance, and it's fantastic to see, was it 56 people, I think, attending today, which is a really good number, then it's not going to be worth putting them on, but it's great to see so many people joining in. Hopefully we'll now see a big expansion in the ancient tree inventory in the East Sussex area. Everybody be out walking and finding some of these trees. So please remember that the webinar is going to be posted onto published onto the Rother District website. Laura, any ideas when, roughly, in the next week or two?
Yes, so hopefully very soon. We are just waiting on sharing the last recording because we've been in a PERDA period, so it's been limited what we can post. So we'll be sharing that recording, and then this will be out shortly after. So as soon as possible.
Okay, that's great. So everybody, if you do know of anybody that you think might enjoy those talks, then please pass that information on. And just finally, the next Rother Tree Hour webinar will be on the 1st of June, again between 3 and 4 p.m. And this one will be talking about Dutch elm disease in East Sussex. So that's all, and thank you all very much for attending. Really great. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.